Hi, and welcome to Dear Andy, where every week we answer your college football questions here at SI.com. Let's get right to them. This question comes from @LTSRow. How many more seasons for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame? 1? 2? This is a great question, and I don't think it's because Brian Kelly's going to do anything to get himself fired. Just the opposite. I think he's going to coach his way into some NFL interest, and I think he's going to take a very hard look at his situation at Notre Dame. He's in a place where, let's face it, it's harder to win than at most of the other schools that want to compete for a national title. Most other schools are not going to go and say, hey, your starting quarterback had an issue in a class, he's suspended for the entire season, he can come back next year. Or the following season say, hey, a bunch of your best players, they're out for the year. They had an issue in a class, they're gone. Good for Notre Dame for upholding those standards. The school is protecting a very good academic reputation. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're Brian Kelly and you're looking at it from a competitive standpoint, your job's a lot harder than some of those other guys' jobs. And so if an NFL team comes calling and says, we'll give you a truckload of money and you don't have to deal with this stuff, I think he's probably going to look at it. I think he has to. It is a tough job at Notre Dame. He's doing a great job of it. If Notre Dame is as good this year as we think the Irish are going to be, then I think there's going to be a lot of interest for Brian Kelly out there. This question comes from Kyle. In 8 months, Michigan interim athletic director Jim Hackett has hired Jim Harbaugh and landed Nike. Is he the greatest AD ever or the greatest human being ever? Kyle, I don't know if we can make an assessment on either one quite yet at this early date, but you do raise a great point. We are 10 months removed from Michigan offering 2 tickets to a home football game with the purchase of 2 20-ounce bottles of Coke. Think about the difference between September, October, and now in terms of how excited people at Michigan are about their football program, about their athletic department in general. Now, when Jim Hackett was brought in as the interim, you could look at it and say, wait, they brought in another guy from the business world. Dave Brandon came from Domino's Pizza, did not work out. Jim Hackett made his bones in the office furniture business, but it turns out just because 2 people came from the private sector doesn't mean they're going to act the same way. Jim Hackett, from those I've talked to who've dealt with him a lot, is a salt-of-the-earth guy, good decision maker, doesn't believe too much in his own genius, and he's pulled off some great moves. Hiring Jim Harbaugh, chief among them, because let's face it, if your football program wins and your men's basketball program wins, there's a good chance you're going to think your AD's a genius. Men's basketball program is pretty good under John Beilein. The football program, well, look at Jim Harbaugh's history. He's probably going to have them winning again. As far as Nike goes, well, Nike, Adidas, that's a matter of taste in terms of apparel. In this case, it is a little interesting because Nike owned the trademark on the color maize. So when Adidas had Michigan, it couldn't use one of Michigan's school colors. It had to create a color called sun, which wasn't quite maize. You guys like college football. You know this stuff means something to people. So in this case, Jim Hackett brought back Jim Harbaugh, and he brought back maize. It's a pretty good first 8 months. This question comes from David. Dear Andy, what's the worst loss any national champion has had? Ohio State's loss to Virginia Tech last year has to rank pretty high, no? I think you're right, David. You know, you can go way back. You can go, say, to that 1941 national title that Alabama claims, where the Crimson Tide got shut out twice that season, once by Vanderbilt, once by Mississippi State. But that wasn't awarded by any of the polls that we really consider to be the official ones. So I don't think you include that. I think you really have to go into the BCS era and look at the 2 LSU national championship teams. Those are probably the 2 that come the closest. In 2003, LSU lost at home to a Florida team that was starting a true freshman, Chris Leak, at quarterback, that would wind up going 8-5. After that game, I'm not sure anybody was thinking LSU was going to win the national title, which is definitely what everybody was thinking after the Virginia Tech-Ohio State game last year. The other one, and this one I think might actually trump last year's Virginia Tech-Ohio State game, is LSU's 2007 national title team. We all know 2007 was a really screwy year. LSU won the national title with 2 losses. And those 2 losses both came to 8-5 teams. They lost to Kentucky and they lost to Arkansas. Granted, that was one of Kentucky's best teams in ages. Andre Woodson at quarterback. They were a pretty good team. That Arkansas team had Darren McFadden. But both those teams finished 8-5. So the question is, do 2 losses against 8-5 teams trump 1 loss against a 7-6 team? I think so, especially when you consider that one of those LSU losses came at the end of the regular season, the Arkansas game. So in Ohio State's case, you had a team that was adjusting to the loss of its starting quarterback. dealing with some new starters in the offensive line. They lost an early season game, and they just got better. LSU dropped a game in the middle of the season and then dropped a game at the end of the season. But that was a weird year, and LSU still ended up winning the national title. Will we see another national champion anytime soon that loses to a 7-6 team? I doubt it. This question comes from Dana. What are the realistic floor and ceiling for Miami this year? Well, Dana, I think the ceiling is an ACC title. I think the floor is a coaching change. What's interesting about this is I don't think those two things are that far apart. Miami plays in the perpetually wide open ACC Coastal Division. The Hurricanes have not represented that division in the ACC title game yet, since the ACC split into divisions in 2005. That's inexcusable. Miami has players. Just look at the NFL draft. They're getting talent. They're just not winning with that talent. Now, they've got a good quarterback in Brad Kaya. I think this could be the year the Hurricanes break through. If you win the Coastal, you're in a one-game situation to win the whole conference. If you win the ACC, you might be in the playoff. But you got to win the Coastal first. And if they can't win the Coastal, then let's be honest, it's going to be wide open again this year. I'm not sure you ever will. For SI.com, I'm Andy Staples.